My worst student became my principal. He got his revenge. Hello, dear friends. I'm Mr. Thompson. I've been teaching for 40 years, and today I need to share with you the most shocking and humbling story of my entire career. This is a story about a troubled student I failed, a teacher who thought he knew everything, and a twist of fate that would teach me the most important lesson of my life. 25 years too late. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about difficult students, about second chances, and about the unexpected ways our past can come back to either haunt us or heal us. This story changed me as a teacher, as a person, and as a human being in ways I never could have imagined. It was September 1995, and I was in my 15th year of teaching at Lincoln High School in Portland, Oregon. I was 38 years old, confident in my abilities, and frankly, quite proud of my reputation as a strict disciplinarian. I believed in rules, structure, and consequences. In my classroom, there was no nonsense, no excuses, and definitely no second chances for students who couldn't follow basic expectations. I thought I was preparing students for the real world, teaching them that actions have consequences, and that respect for authority was non-negotiable. Looking back now, I realize I was probably compensating for my own insecurities as a relatively young teacher by being overly rigid and unforgiving. That's when Marcus Washington walked into my AP English literature class. Marcus was 16 years old, a junior who had been transferred to my advanced class despite a disciplinary record that read like a manual for everything not to do in school. He was tall for his age, with an athletic build and an attitude that seemed to radiate defiance from across the room. Within 5 minutes of meeting him, I knew he was going to be trouble. Marcus came from a single-parent household in one of Portland's toughest neighborhoods. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep their small apartment, and Marcus had essentially been raising himself since middle school. He was incredibly intelligent. His test scores were off the charts, but he seemed determined to use that intelligence to challenge every rule, question every assignment, and disrupt every lesson. From day one, Marcus and I were at war. It started small. He would come to class late, swagger in like he owned the place, and take his seat in the back row with this smirk that seemed to say, "What are you going to do about it?" When I would call on him to answer questions about the reading, he would give responses that were technically correct, but delivered with such sarcasm and attitude that they disrupted the entire class dynamic. "Marcus," I would say, "can you tell us about the symbolism in this passage from Gatsby?" "Sure, Mr. Thompson," he would reply, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. "The green light represents the unattainable American dream, the corruption of wealth, and the tragic futility of trying to recapture the past. Kind of like how you keep trying to teach us that following arbitrary rules will somehow prepare us for a world that doesn't actually work that way." The other students would snicker, and I would feel my blood pressure rising. Marcus had a gift for being technically respectful, while simultaneously being completely insubordinate. As the weeks went by, our conflicts escalated. Marcus would forget to do assignments, then write brilliant essays at the last minute that were clearly better than anything his classmates produced. He would question my interpretation of literary works, not to engage in meaningful discussion, but to show off and undermine my authority. The breaking point came in October, during our unit on To Kill a Mockingbird. We were discussing the character of Atticus Finch and the theme of moral courage when Marcus raised his hand. "Yes, Marcus," I said, already bracing myself. "Mr. Thompson, don't you think it's kind of ironic that we're reading about moral courage and standing up for what's right when this school's discipline system is basically designed to crush any student who doesn't fit into your perfect little boxes?" "Excuse me?" Marcus stood up, and I could see he was building up to something big. I mean, Atticus Finch defended an innocent man even when the whole town was against him. But if a student in this school dares to question unfair policies or speak up about problems, they get detention, suspension, or expelled. Where's the moral courage in that? "Sit down, Marcus. This is not the appropriate forum for—" "No, Mr. Thompson. This is exactly the right forum. We're supposed to be learning about literature and life, but you only want us to learn the parts that make us compliant and obedient. You don't want us to actually think." The classroom was dead silent. 24 other students were watching this confrontation with a mixture of fascination and horror. I felt my authority being challenged in the most fundamental way possible. "Marcus, you need to leave my classroom right now and report to the principal's office." Why? Because I'm asking uncomfortable questions. Because I'm pointing out the hypocrisy of teaching about courage while punishing anyone who actually shows it. I walked over to my desk and picked up the phone to call security. "I'm calling for someone to escort you out." Marcus gathered his books slowly, deliberately. As he walked toward the door, he turned back to face me and the class. "You know what, Mr. Thompson? Someday I'm going to be in a position where I can actually make a difference. And when that day comes, I'm going to remember exactly how it feels to be treated like my thoughts and opinions don't matter." He walked out, leaving me standing there feeling both vindicated and somehow diminished at the same time. That incident led to Marcus's first suspension, but it was far from our last confrontation. Over the following months, Marcus seemed determined to test every boundary, challenge every rule, and make my life as difficult as possible. He would arrive to class with coffee, which was against school policy, and when I would confiscate it, he would point out that I had coffee on my desk. He would wear headphones during independent reading time, arguing that music helped him concentrate and that there was no specific rule against it. Each incident was minor on its own, but together they created this constant atmosphere of tension and conflict. Other teachers began avoiding Marcus, transferring him out of their classes, or simply ignoring his behavior rather than dealing with the disruption. But I refused to back down. I saw Marcus as a test of my teaching abilities, a challenge that I needed to overcome. I documented every infraction, wrote detailed reports about his behavior, and pushed for increasingly severe consequences. The final straw came in March, during what should have been a routine parent-teacher conference. Marcus's mother, Diana Washington, came to school for our scheduled meeting. She was a small, tired-looking woman who worked as a night shift nurse and a weekend housekeeper. She arrived still wearing her scrubs, having come directly from her job at the hospital. "Miss Washington," I began, "thank you for coming. I'm afraid Marcus is having serious problems in my class." "What kind of problems?" she asked, her voice filled with the weariness of a single mother who had dealt with school issues before. I pulled out my folder of documented incidents. "Marcus is consistently disruptive, disrespectful, and defiant. He questions my authority, undermines classroom discipline, and seems to have no respect for the rules that everyone else follows." Miss Washington listened quietly as I detailed her son's transgressions. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Thompson," she said finally, "can I ask you something? What does Marcus's work look like? His actual academic performance?" I had to admit that Marcus's grades were excellent. His essays were sophisticated, his analysis was insightful, and his test scores were among the highest in the class. "Then what exactly is the problem?" she asked. "It sounds like my son is learning, engaging with the material, and performing well academically. Isn't that what school is supposed to be about?" "The problem," I said, feeling my frustration rising, "is that Marcus seems to think the rules don't apply to him. He's disruptive, he's disrespectful, and he's setting a bad example for other students." Or, Miss Washington said quietly, "Maybe Marcus is just a smart kid who's bored and frustrated by a system that seems more interested in compliance than in education." That comment hit me harder than I wanted to admit, but I pressed on. "Miss Washington, I'm recommending that Marcus be transferred to a different class. His behavior is unacceptable, and I don't think this is the right environment for him." What happened next was the beginning of the end. Miss Washington looked at me with disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. "Mr. Thompson, my son comes home every day and talks about how much he loves literature, how excited he is about the books you're reading, how much he wants to be a writer. But he also tells me that you've decided he's a problem and that nothing he does will ever be good enough for you. When it's so." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Marcus isn't perfect. He's a 16-year-old boy who's had to grow up too fast, who's seen too much, and who sometimes doesn't know how to channel his intelligence and energy in ways that make adults comfortable. But he's not a bad kid, Mr. Thompson. He's just a kid who needs someone to believe in him instead of constantly looking for reasons to punish him. I transferred Marcus out of my class the following week. But our story was far from over. 2 weeks after Marcus left my class, I learned that he had been involved in a cheating scandal. According to the investigation, Marcus had been selling test answers and homework assignments to other students. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, and Marcus was facing expulsion. As his former teacher, I was called in to provide testimony about his character and behavior. I told the disciplinary committee about his disruptive behavior, his disrespect for authority, and his pattern of rule breaking. I painted a picture of a student who clearly had no respect for academic integrity. Marcus was expelled from Lincoln High School in April 1995. The last time I saw him, he was cleaning out his locker while his mother waited nearby, looking devastated. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus stopped and looked back at me. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice calm but filled with something I couldn't quite identify. "Someday you're going to realize that you had a chance to help someone, and you chose to destroy them instead. I hope when that day comes, you remember this moment." Then he was gone, and I felt relieved. Marcus Washington was no longer my problem. Over the following months, I convinced myself that I had done the right thing. Marcus was a disruptive influence who had finally shown his true colors by cheating. I had maintained classroom discipline and upheld academic standards. I was a good teacher who had dealt appropriately with a bad student. The years passed. I continued teaching at Lincoln High School, earning a reputation as a strict but effective educator. I won teaching awards, mentored new faculty, and was eventually promoted to department head. I prided myself on running a tight ship, maintaining high standards, and not tolerating nonsense from students who thought they could get away with anything. Occasionally, someone would ask me about Marcus Washington, and I would simply say that some students aren't cut out for academic success, that natural consequences had taken their course, and that you can't save everyone. I never followed up on what happened to him after his expulsion. I assumed he had probably dropped out of school entirely, maybe gotten his GED eventually, and was most likely working some dead-end job. I told myself that his failure wasn't my responsibility, that I had given him every opportunity to succeed and he had chosen a different path. I was wrong about everything. 25 years later, in August 2020, I was preparing for what I thought would be my final year of teaching. At 63 years old, I was ready to retire after 4 decades in education. Lincoln High School was getting a new principal. My longtime administrator had retired, and I was looking forward to working with someone new for my last year. The faculty meeting where we would meet our new principal was scheduled for the Tuesday before school started. I arrived early, as I always did, and took my usual seat in the front row of the auditorium. As teachers filtered in, there was the usual speculation about who the new principal would be, what changes they might implement, and whether they would be supportive of veteran faculty. At exactly 9 a.m., the district superintendent took the stage. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "I'm thrilled to introduce you to Lincoln High School's new principal, Dr. Marcus Washington." I felt like I had been struck by lightning. Walking onto the stage was Marcus Washington, older, more polished, wearing an expensive suit, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had achieved significant success. But it was unmistakably him. The same intelligent eyes, the same tall frame, the same presence that had filled my classroom 25 years earlier. As he began speaking to the faculty, I learned that Dr. Marcus Washington held a PhD in educational leadership from Stanford University, had served as principal at 2 highly successful urban schools, and had been recruited to Lincoln specifically because of his reputation for turning around struggling institutions. He spoke eloquently about his vision for the school, his commitment to both academic excellence and social justice, and his belief that every student deserved to be seen, heard, and valued. "Oh!" The faculty was clearly impressed. He was articulate, charismatic, and obviously very good at his job. During his presentation, his eyes found mine in the audience. For just a moment, our gazes locked, and I saw something flicker across his face. After the meeting, teachers crowded around Dr. Washington to introduce themselves and ask questions. I hung back, unsure whether to approach him or simply hope he wouldn't remember me. That hope was short-lived. "Mr. Thompson," came a voice behind me as I was gathering my things. Could I speak with you for a moment? I turned to face Marcus Dr. Washington, my former student, who was now my boss. Up close, he looked every inch the successful administrator, perfectly groomed, confident, professional. Alls. But I could still see traces of the 16-year-old who had challenged me in that classroom so many years ago. Dr. Washington, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Congratulations on your appointment. Thank you, he replied, his tone polite but unreadable. I'm looking forward to working with you. I understand you're our senior English teacher and department head. Yes, that's right. Excellent. I'd like to schedule some time to meet with all department heads individually over the next few weeks. Would you be available Thursday afternoon? Of course. He smiled, a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Oh, perfect. I'll have my secretary send you the details. As he walked away, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This couldn't be a coincidence. Of all the schools in all the districts in the country, Marcus Washington had ended up as principal of Lincoln High School, where I was still teaching, and now he was my boss. Thursday couldn't come fast enough, and yet I was dreading it at the same time. When I arrived at the principal's office for our meeting, I was struck by how different it looked. Marcus had already redecorated, replacing the generic motivational posters with artwork created by students and books by authors of color. His desk was organized, but not sterile, and the whole space felt more welcoming than it had under previous administrators. Mr. Thompson, Marcus said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. I sat down, trying to read his expression. Was he angry, vengeful, pleased to have power over the teacher who had made his life miserable? So, he began, leaning back in his chair, 40 years of teaching. That's quite an accomplishment. Thank you. I've been reviewing your personnel file. Very impressive. Teaching awards, department leadership, high student achievement scores. You've clearly had a successful career. I waited for the other shoe to drop. I'm particularly interested in your approach to classroom management. Marcus continued. I understand you're known for maintaining high standards and expecting excellence from your students. I try to prepare students for the real world, I said carefully. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And how do you handle students who struggle with those expectations? The ones who might not fit easily into traditional structures? The question felt loaded, but I answered honestly. I try to help them understand that following rules and respecting authority are essential life skills. Students who can't or won't adapt to reasonable expectations need to face natural consequences. Natural consequences, Marcus repeated. That's an interesting phrase. He was quiet for a long moment, and I felt sweat beginning to form on my forehead. Mr. Thompson, he said finally, I want you to know that I'm very much looking forward to working with you this year. I think we have a lot to learn from each other. I thank you, Dr. Washington. I'll be observing classes regularly. Of course, new principal, you understand. I want to get a feel for how the school operates, what's working well, what might need some adjustment. The way he said adjustment made me deeply uncomfortable. I'll be starting with department heads, he continued. Since you're the educational leaders in the building, I hope you don't mind if I'm fairly thorough in my observations. Of course not. Excellent. Marcus smiled that same professional smile. I'll see you Monday morning for first period. I believe you have AP Literature? Over the following weeks, Marcus began what I can only describe as the most intensive evaluation process I had ever experienced. He observed my classes multiple times per week, took detailed notes about my teaching methods, and asked probing questions about my interactions with students. At first, I tried to tell myself that this was normal behavior for a new principal. Los defiant. He was just being thorough, getting to know his faculty, establishing his leadership style. But as the observations continued, I began to feel like I was under a microscope. Marcus would sit in the back of my classroom, watching everything I did with laser focus. When students asked questions, he would note how I responded. When students seemed confused or disengaged, he would write extensively in his notebook. When I enforced classroom rules or corrected student behavior, his pen would move across the page like he was documenting evidence. After each observation, he would schedule a debrief meeting where he would ask me to explain my teaching choices. Mr. Thompson, I noticed that when Sarah asked for clarification about the assignment, you told her the instructions were already written on the board and she should pay better attention. Can you walk me through your thinking there? Well, Dr. Washington, I believe students need to take responsibility for listening to directions the first time.
If I constantly repeat myself, they learn that they don't need to pay attention.
I see. And how do you think Sarah felt in that moment? I think she learned to be more attentive in the future. Marcus would nod and make more notes, but I could never tell if he agreed with my responses or was documenting my failures. The scrutiny was exhausting. Every interaction with students became something I second-guessed. Every disciplinary decision felt like it was being evaluated. I found myself becoming even more rigid in my teaching, more focused on maintaining control because I felt like any sign of weakness would be used against me. Then came the incident with Kevin Martinez. Kevin was a junior in my AP literature class, a bright kid from a working-class family who was clearly struggling to keep up with the demands of advanced coursework. He had missed several assignments and seemed increasingly overwhelmed as the semester progressed. During a class discussion about The Great Gatsby, Kevin raised his hand with a question about the symbolism of the Valley of Ashes. It was a good question, showing that he was engaged with the text, but he had clearly misunderstood some basic plot points. Kevin, I said, perhaps more sharply than necessary, if you had done the reading carefully, you would understand that the Valley of Ashes represents the moral and spiritual desolation of American society. This is basic literary analysis that we've discussed multiple times. Kevin's face reddened and he slumped down in his seat. Sorry, Mr. Thompson. Kevin, if you're not prepared to participate at the level this class requires, perhaps you should consider transferring to regular English. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. It was the same kind of dismissive comment I had been making for 40 years, the kind of remark that I believed motivated students to work harder. But this time, Dr. Washington was sitting in the back of my classroom, and I saw him stop writing and look up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. After class, Marcus asked to speak with me immediately. Mr. Thompson, he said once, we were alone in my classroom. Can you help me understand what just happened with Kevin? Kevin hasn't been keeping up with the coursework. He's clearly struggling with the material, and I think he might be better served in a less demanding class. Kevin asked a thoughtful question about the text. He was engaging with the material and trying to understand it better. But he misunderstood basic plot elements. In an AP class, students need to come prepared with a solid understanding of the reading. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Mr. Thompson, what if Kevin is working 2 jobs to help support his family? What if he's reading by streetlight because his electricity was shut off? What if he's doing his best, but his best doesn't look like what you expect it to look like? Students need to manage their personal circumstances and still meet academic expectations. No, Marcus said firmly. That's how your world works. The real world is full of people who've succeeded despite having teachers who couldn't see past their circumstances to their potential. Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. This wasn't just a disagreement about teaching philosophy. This felt personal. Dr. Washington, I said slowly, are we still talking about Kevin? Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I remembered from 25 years earlier. That same intelligence, that same frustration, that same sense of being misunderstood and undervalued. We're talking about every student who ever walked into your classroom, carrying burdens you couldn't see, dealing with challenges you couldn't imagine, and hoping for just one adult who would believe in them instead of looking for reasons to write them off. The words hit me like a physical blow. I knew in that moment that this wasn't just about Kevin Martinez. This was about Marcus Washington, the 16-year-old who had sat in my classroom 25 years earlier, asking for someone to see his potential instead of just his problems. Dr. Washington, I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. Mr. Thompson, I want you to think very carefully about the kind of teacher you want to be in your final year, because I'll be watching very closely. Over the following months, Marcus's observations became increasingly pointed. He would document every interaction I had with struggling students, every time I showed impatience with questions, every moment when I chose compliance over compassion. But he also began doing something else. He started showing me alternatives. When I would dismiss a student's question as poorly thought out, Marcus would follow up with that student privately, helping them articulate their thoughts and encouraging them to keep asking questions. When I would suggest that struggling students might be better served in easier classes, Marcus would provide additional support and resources to help them succeed where they were. I began to see the same students through two different lenses. My lens, which focused on their deficits and failures, and Marcus's lens, which seemed to see potential and possibility even in the most challenging situations. Kevin Martinez, the student I had suggested should transfer to regular English, began staying after school for extra help that Marcus had arranged. With additional support and encouragement, Kevin not only improved his performance in my class, but went on to score a 4 on the AP Literature exam. Other students who I had written off as unmotivated or unprepared began thriving under Marcus's leadership. He created mentorship programs, expanded office hours, and established study groups that helped struggling students access the support they needed to succeed. As I watched these transformations, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in decades. In February, Marcus scheduled what he called a mid-year evaluation conference. I expected another critique of my teaching, another list of areas for improvement. Instead, he presented me with a question that would change everything. "Mr. Thompson," he said, sitting across from his desk, "what do you think makes a great teacher?" I gave him my standard answer about high expectations, clear standards, and consistent accountability. "Those are important," Marcus agreed. "But what about hope? What about seeing potential in students, even when they can't see it themselves? What about being the adult who believes in someone when no one else will?" "I've always believed in my students," I protested. "Have you?" Marcus asked quietly. "Or have you believed in the students who were easy to believe in? The ones who came to class prepared, followed the rules, and met your expectations without requiring much from you?" The question stung because it was true. "Mr. Thompson, I want to share something with you. 25 years ago, I was a student in your AP Literature class. I was angry, disruptive, and difficult. I challenged your authority, questioned your methods, and made your life miserable." My heart stopped. Even though I had suspected, hearing him confirm it was still shocking. "You had me transferred out of your class. You testified against me during my disciplinary hearing. You played a significant role in my expulsion from this school." I felt sick. "Marcus, I felt sick." "Let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. "At the time, I was furious. I felt like you had given up on me, like you had decided I was a lost cause and were determined to prove yourself right. I carried that anger for years." He paused, looking out the window. "But something interesting happened after I left Lincoln High School. I realized that you had taught me something incredibly valuable, even though neither of us knew it at the time." "What was that?" "You taught me what it feels like to be dismissed, to be written off, to have adults in positions of power decide that you're not worth investing in. And that experience, as painful as it was, shaped everything I've done since." Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense but not angry. "When I went to alternative school after my expulsion, I met teachers who saw potential in students everyone else had given up on. They showed me what it looked like to believe in someone, even when they're at their worst. They taught me that intelligence and potential can look a lot of different ways, and that sometimes the most challenging students are the ones who need us most." I was struggling to process what he was telling me. I became an educator because of what I learned from both experiences. From teachers like you who showed me how not to treat struggling students, and from teachers who showed me how to see possibility where others see problems. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I failed you. I failed as a teacher and as a human being." "Yes," he said simply. "You did." The acknowledgement was like a knife to the chest, but somehow necessary. But Marcus continued, "I didn't become your principal to punish you or to get revenge. I came here because I believe in second chances, because I think people can grow and change, and because I wanted to see if a teacher I once respected could learn to be better. I don't understand. Mr. Thompson, despite everything that happened between us, you were still one of the most intellectually challenging teachers I ever had. Your knowledge of literature was profound, your analysis was sophisticated, and when you weren't busy trying to control everything, you could inspire students to think deeply about important ideas. He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. I've been watching you this year, not just to critique your methods, but to see if you could learn to combine your academic strengths with the kind of compassion and understanding that struggling students need. And what have you concluded? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since he had returned to Lincoln High School, it was a genuine smile, not a professional one. I've concluded that you're capable of being the teacher I needed 25 years ago, but it's going to require you to let go of some beliefs and methods that have defined your career. Over the following months, Marcus began working with me in a way that was part supervision, part mentoring, and part therapy. He helped me recognize how my focus on compliance and control had prevented me from seeing the humanity in my most challenging students. He showed me how to ask different questions. Not why can't this student follow simple instructions, but what barriers might this student be facing that are making it difficult for them to succeed. He taught me to look for signs of potential rather than evidence of failure, to see disruptive behavior as possible, evidence of intelligence and creativity rather than simply defiance. Most importantly, he helped me understand that being a great teacher isn't about being right all the time. It's about being willing to admit when you're wrong and to grow from those mistakes. The transformation wasn't easy. 40 years of teaching habits don't change overnight, but gradually, I began to see my students differently. When Kevin Martinez asked another question that showed incomplete understanding, instead of suggesting he transfer to an easier class, I said, "That's a great question, Kevin. Let's think through this together." And I watched his face light up with engagement instead of shutting down with shame. When Maria Gonzalez turned in an essay that was late but showed genuine insight instead of simply deducting points for lateness, I wrote feedback that acknowledged her ideas and offered support for meeting deadlines in the future. When James Thompson, no relation, challenged my interpretation of a poem in a way that felt disrespectful, instead of shutting him down, I said, "I disagree with your analysis, but I'm interested in your thinking. Can you walk me through your reasoning?" Each small change felt significant, like I was learning to teach all over again. In May, as the school year was drawing to a close, Marcus asked me to stay after a faculty meeting. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I have something I want to share with you." He handed me a letter written on official letterhead from Stanford University. "This is a recommendation letter I wrote for Kevin Martinez. He's been accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship, and he wants to study English literature." I stared at the letter, thinking about the boy I had almost written off as not college material. "Kevin asked me to give you something," Marcus continued, handing me another envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for helping me learn to ask better questions and for teaching me that literature can help us understand ourselves and our world. I hope to be a teacher someday too. Kevin Martinez." I felt tears forming in my eyes. "Marcus," I said, "how can I ever thank you for what you've taught me this year?" "By continuing to grow," he replied, "by remembering that every student who walks into your classroom is someone's child, someone with dreams and potential, and challenges you may never see, by being the teacher you've always had the capacity to be." As I prepared for retirement that summer, I realized that my final year of teaching had been my first year of really understanding what education could be. Marcus Washington had given me the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to end my career as a better teacher than I had been for most of it. At my retirement party, Marcus spoke to the assembled faculty and community members. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "has been my teacher twice in my life. The first time 25 years ago, he taught me what it felt like to be dismissed and undervalued. That lesson was painful, boys, but it was also transformative because it helped me understand what students need from their teachers." He paused, looking directly at me. "The second time, this year, he taught me something even more valuable, that it's never too late to grow, to change, and to become the person you're meant to be." Watching him transform his approach to teaching has been one of the most inspiring experiences of my career. The audience applauded, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Mr. Thompson, you asked me once how you could thank me for this year. Here's how. Remember that the most difficult students are often the ones who need us most. Remember that potential doesn't always look the way we expect it to look. And remember that the best teachers are the ones who never stop learning. As the evening wound down, Marcus and I found ourselves alone in the school courtyard, where we had had so many difficult conversations over the course of the year. Marcus, I said, I need to ask you something. The cheating scandal that got you expelled, were you actually guilty? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I was set up by a student who wanted to get back at me for refusing to help him cheat. But by that point, so many teachers and administrators had decided I was a problem that the truth didn't really matter. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had I failed to support a student who needed help, but I had actively contributed to punishing him for something he didn't do. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I know you are, Marcus replied. And I forgive you. More than that, I'm grateful for what happened, because it led me to become the educator I am today. As we stood there in the fading light, I marveled at the journey that had brought us to this moment. The angry 16-year-old who had challenged my authority had grown into a wise leader who had challenged me to be better. The student I had failed had become the principal who helped me succeed. Marcus, I said, what you've done this year, helping me grow, showing me how to be better, that wasn't revenge, that was grace. He smiled. Maybe the best revenge is helping someone become the person they always had the potential to be. Today, as I enjoy my retirement, I often think about the students I taught over 4 decades. I wonder how many Marcus Washingtons I dismissed, how many Kevin Martinez I discouraged, how many young people I failed to see clearly because I was too focused on compliance and control. But I also think about the teachers Marcus helped me inspire in that final year, colleagues who watched my transformation and began questioning their own assumptions about difficult students. I think about the ripple effects of learning to see potential instead of problems, of choosing compassion over control. Marcus Washington got his revenge, but not in the way I had feared. He got his revenge by refusing to let me end my career as the same teacher who had failed him 25 years earlier. He got his revenge by insisting that I become better, by showing me what great teaching really looks like, by proving that it's never too late to learn. The boy I couldn't reach became the man who reached me. The student I failed became the principal who saved me from failing others. That's the real power of education. Not just the knowledge we impart, but the relationships we build, the second chances we offer, and the grace we show to those who need it most. Marcus taught me that the best teachers aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who learn from their mistakes and use those lessons to lift up the next generation. As I finish writing this story, I realize that Marcus Washington didn't just become my principal, he became my greatest teacher. And the lesson he taught me will echo through every student whose life is touched by the teachers I influenced in that final transformative year. Sometimes the people we think we've lost forever come back to save us from ourselves. Sometimes our biggest failures become our most important teachers. And sometimes the student we couldn't reach becomes the leader who helps us finally understand what reaching really means. Thank you, Marcus, for showing me that it's never too late to become the teacher and the person you were always meant to be.